There are moments in a life, sharp, breathless, unrepeatable, that split everything into before and after. Not the grand moments. Not graduation stages or wedding altars. The small, impossible ones. The ones that happen in the dark, when no one is watching, when every sensible voice inside you screams walk away, and something deeper, something that has no name and no logic, whispers, stay. Joy had been walking away her whole life. Away from the landlord's red notices taped to her door. Away from the debt collectors who called at 6 a.m. like they owned the sunrise too. Away from the art school dream she'd folded up and tucked so far down inside herself she'd almost forgotten its shape. Survival, she had learned, required a certain practiced blindness. You kept your head down. You kept moving. You did not stop for things that were not your business. She was almost good at it. It was 11:47 p.m. when Joy cut through the underground parking garage on Fletcher Street, not because it was safe, but because it was faster, and her feet ached inside shoes that had long since given up the pretense of support. The garage hummed with the particular silence of a place that had swallowed too many late nights, fluorescent lights stuttering overhead, the smell of oil and cold concrete, the distant drip of something unseen. She had $3 and a broken paintbrush in her coat pocket. She had a shift at the diner at 6 a.m. She had exactly 0 reasons to stop. And then she heard it. Thud. 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 Rhythmic. Deliberate. Coming from the trunk of a pearl-black sedan so expensive it looked like it had been imported from a different dimension, all sleek edges and chrome trim, gleaming under the stuttering lights like it was embarrassed to be here. A car that belonged in a penthouse garage, not this crumbling structure on Fletcher Street. Joy stopped walking. Don't, said every sensible part of her. You don't know what that is. Could be anything. Could be dangerous. Could be the last sound you ever investigate. Keep walking, Joy. Keep walking. Thud. 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 Slower now. Weaker. Like someone, was running out of time to ask for help. She stood there for 4 seconds that felt like a small eternity, her hand gripping the strap of her bag, her breath fogging in the cold air. She thought about her mother, who had always said her heart was too big for the life she'd been given. She thought about the red notices on her door. She thought about how being invisible had never once actually kept her safe. Then Joy set her bag down, pulled the rusted crowbar from beside the maintenance cart she passed every night, and walked toward the sound. She didn't know, in that moment, that the trunk contained a man bound in thick hemp rope, his ivory dress shirt soaked through with blood, a gash carved across his cheekbone like a signature, a man who commanded an empire, who had enemies on 3 continents, who had been betrayed by his most trusted lieutenant on a rooftop in Seoul and left to die in the trunk of a car on Fletcher Street. She didn't know that prying open that trunk would make her a target, a fugitive, a fighter, and eventually, impossibly, something she had no word for yet. All she knew was the sound. Thud. The crowbar connected with the lock. Metal screamed. And Joy's before ended, right there, in the dark, in a stuttering light, in a garage that smelled of oil and cold concrete and the beginning of something neither of them would survive unchanged. The crowbar was heavier than it looked. Joy hadn't planned to pick it up. She'd been walking the way she always walked through the Fletcher Street garage at night, fast, purposeful, eyes forward, the particular gait of a woman who had learned that appearing uncertain in the dark was its own kind of invitation. Her shift at Della's diner had ended at 11:30. Her feet were telling her about every hour of it. She was 17 steps from the stairwell exit when she heard it. Thud. She stopped. Not because she wanted to. Because her body did it before her brain could file an objection. Thud. Thud. The sound was coming from the far end of the garage, where a single pearl-black sedan sat alone beneath a stuttering fluorescent light like a painting that didn't belong in its frame. The car was wrong for this garage, wrong for this entire zip code. Long, low, obscenely expensive, the kind of vehicle whose price tag could have cleared Joy's debt twice over with enough left for a vacation she'd never take. She turned and looked at the stairwell door. 11 steps. She could be through it in 4 seconds. Thud. Weaker that time. Joy pressed her eyes shut for a moment and had a brief, fierce argument with herself. The sensible side had good points. Excellent points. Statistically, nothing good had ever come from a woman alone in a parking garage investigating sounds from a stranger's trunk at midnight. Her mother had raised her to be smart. Survival required a practiced blindness. She had rent due in 6 days and couldn't afford a hospital visit. But the sound had changed again, slower now, with a ragged, desperate quality to it, like something running out of last chances. Joy walked to the maintenance cart, picked up the crowbar, and moved toward the car before she'd consciously decided to. That was the thing about her brave, foolish heart. It never asked permission. Up close, the sedan smelled of pine air freshener and something darker underneath, copper and cold sweat, the unmistakable scent of a night gone catastrophically wrong. Joy pressed her ear to the trunk. The thudding had stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. "Hey." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat. "Hey. If someone's in there, knock twice." 2 slow, deliberate knocks. The air left her lungs all at once. She looked around the garage. Empty. The fluorescent above her gave one long, theatrical flicker, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Joy shifted her grip on the crowbar and wedged the flat end into the trunk's lock seam. The metal resisted. Of course it did. Nothing in her life came apart easily. She threw her weight behind it, biceps burning, teeth clenched, the crowbar biting deeper into the seam with each push. She thought about every late notice. Every shift. Every canvas she'd sold for $40 that should have been worth $400. She thought about all the doors that had stayed shut no matter how hard she knocked. The trunk lock gave way with a shriek of tearing metal that bounced off every concrete pillar in the garage. Joy staggered back a step, crowbar raised instinctively. The trunk swung open. The first thing she saw was the rope. Thick, coarse hemp, wound multiple times around a man's torso and wrists with the kind of careful, deliberate cruelty that suggested the people responsible had done this before. The second thing she saw was the shirt, ivory, expensive, the collar still holding the ghost of a precise fold, now smeared with dirt and dark with blood. Then the man lifted his head, and Joy forgot, briefly, how to breathe. He was, there was no other word for it, extraordinary. Even battered, even bleeding, even folded into the trunk of a car like something discarded, the man radiated a quality that grime couldn't conceal. Sharp, aristocratic features. A jaw that looked carved rather than grown. And eyes, dark, fiercely intelligent eyes that found her face in the half-dark and locked on with an intensity that made her feel, absurdly, like she was the one being assessed. A gash ran across his left cheekbone, crusted at the edges. His lower lip was split. He breathed in slow, deliberate pulls, like a man who had decided that panic was beneath him. For 3 full seconds, they stared at each other. "You are not one of them." His voice was low, accented, roughened by whatever hours he'd spent in this trunk. It wasn't a question. "I work at a diner," Joy said, which was not what she'd meant to say at all. Something moved in those dark eyes. Not quite amusement. Something adjacent to it, born in a place that had recently been through a great deal. "Then you are either very brave," he said slowly, "or very unlucky." Joy looked at the rope. She looked at the blood. She looked at the empty garage around them and made a decision she suspected she'd be living with for a very long time. "Probably both," she said, and reached in for the knot. The rope was the outer layer. Beneath it, zip ties bound his wrists, industrial, thick, the kind that didn't yield to fingernails or goodwill. Joy pulled the wire cutters from the maintenance cart's side pocket and went to work while the man sat with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural, watching her with those dark, careful eyes. "My name is Eun-woo," he said. "Joy. Joy." He said it quietly, like he was filing it somewhere important. "Joy, I need you to understand something before you finish." She kept cutting. "Understanding can wait. These can't." "No." His voice sharpened just enough to make her hands slow. "It cannot wait. The men who put me here, they will have someone watching this garage. When they see this car has been disturbed, they will come back. And when they find you with me," he paused, "you will not be a bystander to them. You will be a liability." Joy looked up at him. "Are you telling me to put you back?" The ghost of that almost amusement again. "I am telling you what you are walking into. The choice remains yours." She held his gaze for a beat. Then she cut the last zip tie, and the bindings fell away, and Eun-woo pulled his arms forward with a sharp intake of breath that he suppressed almost immediately, the sound of a man who had trained himself not to show pain to anyone. "Can you walk?" she asked. He swung his legs over the edge of the trunk, tested his weight, and stood. Unsteady for a moment. Then still. Even wrecked, he stood like someone who was accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Yes, he said. From somewhere deep in the garage, the entrance level, maybe 2 floors up, Joy heard the sound of tires. Slow. Deliberate. Searching. Their eyes met. Now would be good, Eun-woo said. They ran. Joy grabbed her bag without thinking and moved for the stairwell. Eun-woo was half a step behind her, injured, bound for hours, and still somehow faster than she expected, eating ground in long strides, his ruined dress shirt catching the stuttering light as they cleared the main level. The black sedan rolled into view just as the stairwell door swung shut behind them. Don't stop, Eun-woo said, low and urgent, right behind her ear as they took the stairs 2 at a time. Below them, a car door opened. Then another. Voices. Korean, fast and clipped, the tone of men receiving bad news. Joy's heart was a fist hammering at her ribs. 4th floor, 5th floor, the stairwell vibrated with the sound of footsteps below accelerating. She hit the 6th floor door, burst through it into the open-air level, cold night air slamming into her face like a wall. This way. She didn't know why she was leading. She just was. She knew this neighborhood in the way that people who can't afford to leave anywhere always know their neighborhood. Every alley, every gap in a fence, every unlocked ground floor door. She heard the stairwell door crack open 2 floors below. Eun-woo caught a gunman at the landing. She heard it more than saw it, the sharp percussion of a struggle, a body hitting concrete, then Eun-woo's footsteps resuming without hesitation. He emerged through the rooftop door behind her with blood on his knuckles that wasn't entirely his own. 1 down, he said, breathing hard. 2 more behind. Joy grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the far edge of the roof, where a fire escape ladder dropped to the alley below. Then let's not be here when they arrive. He looked at the ladder. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, something that had nothing to do with the gunman and everything to do with the woman dragging him toward a fire escape at midnight in a city she clearly knew better than anyone who'd locked him in a trunk. Then they climbed down into the dark, and the city swallowed them whole. Joy's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been promising renovations since 2019 and delivering excuses ever since. The elevator hadn't worked in 4 months. The hallway smelled of someone's late dinner and old carpet. The lock on her door required a specific, practiced jiggle that she'd never bothered to explain to anyone because no one had ever come home with her before. She got it open, hit the light switch, and stepped back to let Eun-woo through. He stepped inside and stopped. She watched him take it in, the small space organized with the careful precision of someone who'd made peace with not having much. A fold-out couch. A kitchen the size of a generous thought. Stacks of books on every horizontal surface, flagged with sticky notes in 3 colors. A folding table pushed against the window with an easel beside it, 3 unfinished canvases leaning against the wall. A pot of dried ramen noodles on the counter. 1 good chair. It was the furthest possible thing from wherever Eun-woo came from. The distance between them wasn't just the accent or the expensive remnants of his shout. It was visible in the way he stood in her small living room, not with contempt, nothing so predictable, but with a particular kind of stillness, like a man encountering something he didn't have a category for. Sit, Joy said, and moved to the kitchen to put water on. You paint, he said. Sometimes. When the diner doesn't take everything. She glanced at the canvases. Don't read into them. He sat carefully on the folding chair, and the room, somehow, rearranged itself around him. This battered, improbable man in his ruined ivory shirt, looking at her unfinished paintings with those dark, measuring eyes. His presence filled the space differently than the absence had. She noticed that, and filed it away in a place she didn't intend to examine yet. She set a bowl of ramen in front of him without asking. He looked at it. Then at her. Thank you, he said, and meant it in a way that went somewhere beyond the bowl. Tell me who did this to you, she said, sitting across from him with her own cup. And tell me how much danger we're actually in right now. No edits. Eun-woo was quiet for a moment. Then he began. His name, his full name, carried weight in certain circles on 3 continents. Joy didn't know those circles. That, he said, might be the only reason she was still breathing. His second-in-command was a man named Di-hyun, older, trusted, positioned like a brother. For 6 years, Eun-woo had treated him like one. Given him access, authority, The kind of loyalty that a man in Eun-woo's world rarely offered twice. 3 weeks ago, on a rooftop in Seoul, Ji-hyun had offered it back as a knife. Joy cleaned the gunshot graze along Eun-woo's ribs, a close thing, the bullet having carved a channel rather than burying itself, which was luck of the worst and best kind simultaneously, and she worked in silence while he talked, her hands steady in a way her heartbeat wasn't. She'd learned to be steady from a mother who'd worked double shifts and still made Sunday dinner feel like a ceremony. She'd learned it had nothing to do with not being afraid. Ji-hyun had made a deal with a rival organization in exchange for Eun-woo's removal. The trunk, the garage, the gunmen, all Ji-hyun's architecture, precision-built. He'd chosen America for the same reason people discard things far from home. Distance. Deniability. What Ji-hyun had not accounted for was joy. He calculated everything, Eun-woo said quietly, while Joy pressed gauze to his side with hands that did not shake, except the woman who couldn't walk past a sound. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she'd seen on the faces of people who were revising something, some assumption they'd held long enough to mistake it for a fact. I almost walked past it, she said. But you didn't. She secured the bandage and sat back. Ji-hyun, where is he now? Here. His voice dropped, flat and certain. He followed to confirm. He does not trust other people to finish his work. A beat of silence. Then, from somewhere below them, the street door, Joy heard the sound of it opening. Not the jiggle and pull of someone who belonged here. The sound of people who had simply broken what they needed to open. Joy moved before the fear could finish forming. She crossed to the stove in 4 steps and turned the burner beneath the pot of water she'd set to boil 20 minutes ago, still rolling, still climbing. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the hook beside the stove with her right hand and turned to find Eun-woo already on his feet, injury apparently taking a backseat to whatever internal reckoning had just occurred. Hallway will funnel them, he said, low and precise. Single file. Bathroom window opens to the fire escape, Joy said. I'm not running. He looked at her for a fraction of a second. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and unguarded, gone before she could name it. No, he said. Neither am I. The first man came through her door in a way that cost her the lock entirely. She was going to be furious about that later, and Joy swung the skillet in a flat, horizontal arc that connected with an extremely satisfying solidity. The man went into the door frame and then the floor, in that order. The second came with more caution. Eun-woo met him in the narrow hallway with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent years being the most dangerous thing in confined spaces. She didn't watch. She was focused on the third man, who'd gone for the kitchen, who had not accounted for a woman already pouring boiling water in the direction of anyone who came through that particular doorway. He accounted for it now. The fourth, there was always a fourth, caught Joy from behind and got exactly 3 seconds of advantage before Eun-woo appeared at the end of the kitchen like a verdict, and those 3 seconds became the man's ceiling. Then it was over. The apartment sat in ringing silence. The door hung open on one hinge. Joy's kitchen was rearranged in ways she'd be discovering for days. Eun-woo was breathing hard, his bandage dark at the edges, one hand braced on her kitchen counter. He was also, she noticed, putting himself between her and the open door. She still had the skillet. You can put that down, he said. I'll decide when, she said. His mouth curved. Just barely. Just enough. Yes, he said softly. I think you will. They sat on her floor with their backs against the couch because neither of them suggested the alternatives and neither of them wanted to be far from the ground. Joy had her knees pulled up, a glass of water she wasn't drinking in her hand. Eun-woo was beside her, not touching, but close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him in the cold apartment, the particular gravity of a person who had decided to stop performing composure and simply existed, battered and real, in her space. Ji-hyun will send more, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Eun-woo said. He won't. She turned to look at him. 3 days ago, he said, I made a call. Before the trunk. I had suspected, for some time, that trust was being used as a map to find my vulnerabilities. I began keeping records. A pause. The kind of records that the Council of Elders who govern our world consider binding testimony. Joy stared at him. You were already moving against him. I was building a case. I needed time I wasn't certain I'd have. His voice was even. But I had transmitted everything before Di-Hyun's men found me. The elders received it. They have been deliberating. He held up the phone he'd retrieved from one of the men on her floor. Older model, unlocked, a single notification on the screen. He tilted it toward her. The message was in Korean. She couldn't read it. But Eun-woo looked at it for a long moment, and something moved through his face. Not triumph, nothing as simple as that. Something that looked more like the slow, enormous exhale of a man who had been carrying a weight so long he'd forgotten what it felt like not to. It's done, he said quietly. Di-Hyun's authority has been stripped. His allies have been notified that any action against me or anyone connected to me is an action against the council itself. The apartment was very quiet. So the men downstairs are now a significant problem for Di-Hyun and no one else. Joy took a breath. Then another. She looked at the ceiling, at the water stain shaped like a running dog that she'd been meaning to photograph for a painting she'd never started. She thought about $3 in her coat pocket. A broken paintbrush. 17 steps from the stairwell. If I'd kept walking, she said. I know. She looked at him. He was already looking at her. You would have found another way, she said, because she wanted it to be true, because she needed to believe that the universe had a contingency plan that didn't entirely depend on a tired diner worker with a brave, foolish heart. Eun-woo was quiet for a moment. Perhaps, he said. But not this one. And for the first time since the trunk, since the crowbar, since the run, since the skillet and the boiling water and everything that had broken and burned and reshaped itself in the hours between midnight and now, Joy let herself feel the full weight of what she'd walked into. And survived. And won. The glass of water trembled slightly in her hand. Eun-woo reached over, without a word, and steadied it. 1 year is a strange unit of time. Long enough that the body forgets the specific texture of fear, not the fact of it, but the feeling, the way it lives in the chest like a second heartbeat. Long enough that new things grow in the spaces where old terrors used to live. Joy's studio was on the 4th floor of a building in a neighborhood she'd never been able to afford before, and she still occasionally touched the walls when she first arrived in the morning, the way you touch something you're not entirely sure is real. North-facing windows. Light that came in clean and even and generous. 3 large canvases in progress and 1 finished piece already promised to a gallery in the West Village that had reached out to her, not the other way around. She was working on the garage painting when she heard the door. She knew his footsteps by now. She'd learned them the way you learn a language you've been living inside, without noticing the exact moment comprehension arrived, only that one day it was simply there. Eun-woo came in carrying coffee and said nothing for a moment, only looked at the canvas. The painting was dark at the edges, fluorescent light struggling against concrete, a pearl-black car in the background, and at the center, rendered in warm gold against all that gray, a woman with a crowbar and her whole life ahead of her. It's good, he said. It's honest, she said, which was what she meant. He set the coffee beside her easel and came to stand next to her, and they looked at it together. This strange, particular monument to the night that had cracked both their lives open and let something new come through the break. He was different in the ways that mattered. The wariness that had lived behind his eyes in those first weeks had quieted, not gone. Men like Eun-woo didn't simply become unguarded, but changed in quality, pointed outward now rather than in. He laughed more than she'd expected. He read her books without asking and left them with sticky notes that were either incisive or absurd with nothing in between. He had learned, slowly and imperfectly, that safety could look like a woman who couldn't walk away from a sound. She had learned that strength didn't always know it was strength until someone else names it. I've been thinking, Joy said, about what you said that night. On the floor. Whether you would have found another way. And I've decided it doesn't matter. She picked up her brush. You found this way. That's the one that counts. Eun-woo was quiet for a moment. The light moved across the canvas, the gold figure, the crowbar, the chasm in the dark. Joy, he said. I am glad you couldn't walk past it. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She could hear the weight of what was underneath those words, the gratitude and the complicated, enormous thing that lived beside it, the thing neither of them had fully named yet but that existed in every steady hand and shared silence and cup of coffee carried up 4 flights of stairs. I know, she said softly. I'm glad too. Outside, the city moved in its indifferent, beautiful way. Inside, Joy painted. And the man who had arrived in a trunk and stayed by choice stood beside her and watched the light change, and neither of them needed anything else to be true. You just watched Joy go from $3 in her pocket to the woman holding the crowbar that changed everything. And we are just getting started. If you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories coming to this channel are going to have you canceling plans, missing sleep, and sending links to everyone you know. Like this video if Joy earned it. She fought hard enough, the least we can do is show up for her. Next video drops soon, and let me just say this, what's coming will flip everything you thought you knew about these characters. Stay locked in. I'll see you there.